Welcome, and thank you for attending the IDEA B LEA MOE overview of the exceptions workbook process. To begin, this is our standard disclaimer that states that this presentation is solely to provide general information and guidance and does not constitute legal advice. This presentation will cover the IDEA B LEA MOE process, go over the exceptions workbook, how to upload your documents into TIL, and the timeline. The IDEA B LEA MOE process consists of 3 steps. The preliminary compliance review, where we gather resources, perform the calculation, and release preliminary review reports. The exception review process, where districts who failed at least one test will submit an exceptions workbook, certification, and supporting documents. And the third step, which is the final compliance review, where we factor in those exceptions and final reports determine compliance with the IDEA B LEA MOE requirement, and those are posted in the TIL application, GFFC. When you open the exceptions workbook, you'll see several tabs included: the instructions, the certification, the 5 exceptions, and a last tab for the MOE voluntary reduction. The first tab of the exceptions workbook is the instructions. The instructions state that you're going to submit the following 3 documents into the TIL application. You're going to submit the IDEA B LEA MOE certification form, the IDEA B exceptions workbook, and then supporting documents to validate the requested exception amounts. The next tab of the exceptions workbook is the certification tab. This worksheet certifies that the exceptions submitted are complete, accurate, and supported by documentation. Please be sure to fill out the entire form. The first exception in the workbook is the voluntary departure of personnel. The supporting documentation required for this exception would be a year-to-date payroll journal for all employees listed on the exceptions workbook, and the documentation should show that the employee was paid from Fund 199 420 or 437 and PIC 233343 in the appropriate school year. You should also be sure to include a resignation letter proving that the employee voluntarily departed the district. This slide shows you an example of the voluntary departure tab within the exceptions workbook and documentation that includes the fund code, the PIC code, and the requested amount as it ties back to the workbook. The second exception is a decrease in enrollment of students with disabilities. The people who should claim this exception would be any LEA with a decrease in the special education population from the previous year that results in a decrease in total expenditures. And that decrease can either be at an LEA level, campus level, classroom level, or even in a particular disability or instructional arrangement. Examples of a possible decrease in expenditures due to decreased enrollment might be that staff were reassigned to general education, or a special ed teacher or administrator may have been laid off, or maybe there was a closure of a self-contained classroom or unit. Provide in the workbook a description of the expenditures reduced due to the decrease in enrollment. Consider what was expended from Fund 199 420 and PIC 2233 in the previous year that was not expended in the current year. Supporting documentation for a decrease in enrollment would include student enrollment numbers at the campus or classroom level, or whatever subset it may be, general ledger, payroll journals, or any other supporting documentation to justify the requested amount. This is an example of what the decrease in enrollment tab looks like within the exceptions workbook. The next exception is an exceptionally costly program. Who should claim this exception would be any LEA with a particular high-cost student in the previous year who may have left the district, resulting in a decrease in total state and local expenditures for special education in the current year. And to qualify as an exceptionally costly program, the aggregate cost of service for that student must be greater than $11,462. Qualifying amounts are only those in excess of the $11,462. So consider what was expended from Fund 199 or 420 and pick 22 and 33 in the previous year that was not expended in the current year. A few reasons for termination of obligation to an exceptionally costly program or student would be that the student has aged out, no longer needs the program, or may have left the district. An example of costs to document may be a one-on-one paraprofessional or attendant care aide, specialized transportation, private or public placement tuition, or maybe an educational interpreter. The supporting documentation required must show what was paid from 199 and 420 and pick 23 and 33 in the previous year that was not in the current year. This is an example of what the termination of obligation for an exceptionally costly program to a particular student tab looks like within the exceptions workbook. The next exception we'll discuss is a long-term purchase. And who should claim this exception would be an LEA that had a capital outlay expenditure coded to the class object code 6600 in the previous year, which was not repeated in the current year, which resulted in a decrease in total state and local expenditures for special education in the current year. You must have a capital outlay expenditure such as the acquisition of equipment or construction of a school facility. Equipment means an article of non-expendable, tangible personal property having a useful life of more than 1 year and an acquisition cost which equals or exceeds $5,000. Consider what was expended from Fund 199 or 420 and pick 23 and 33 in the previous year that was not expended in the current year. This is an example of the long-term purchase tab within the exception workbook. Supporting documentation that may be submitted to support this request would be a general ledger or any supporting document to justify the requested amount that shows what was paid from Fund 199-420 and pick 23 and 33 in the previous year that was not spent in the current year, resulting a decrease in expenditures. The fifth exception in the workbook is the assumption by the high-cost grant. Who should claim this exception would be any LEA who received a high-cost grant from Fund 226 in the current year that covered expenses that were previously paid from the general fund in the previous year. Provide in the workbook a description of the state and local expenditures assumed by the high-cost grant in the current year. Supporting documentation must show what was paid from Fund 199 and 420 and pick 23 and 33 in the previous year. It could be a general ledger, maybe a payroll journal, or any other supporting documentation that justifies the requested amount. The final tab of the exceptions workbook is the MOE voluntary reduction, also known as the adjustment to fiscal effort. In order to be eligible to claim this exception, a LEA must meet all three of the following criteria. In the taper report, the LEA must have received a special education determination status of meets requirements. At the end of the school year, the LEA cannot be identified as having significant disproportionality, and the LEA must also have an increase in its 611 funds from the previous year. Once you've completed your certification, your exceptions workbook, and gathered your supporting documentation, you will upload all three items into the TIL application, GFFC reports, and data collection. This tab includes instruction on how to upload the forms and index and the proper indexing information. The project begins in early March with the release of the To the Administrator address letter that gets posted in the TEA correspondence webpage. In late March, the preliminary compliance determinations become available in the GFFC reports TIL application. In early April will be the deadline for the LEAs to submit the exception requests and or any PEMS errors, and that's typically 10 business days after the preliminary reports are released. TEA in April and May will review those exception requests, and in June, file compliance reviews will be posted in the TIL application GFFC. Thank you for listening to our training, and please be sure to check out our other videos.